We want to start by honoring some people tonight and welcoming you into our space. This is el Centro de Muchos Colores. This is the Hispano Resource Center on campus. It's called the Center of Many Colors for many reasons. In '88, we were given that name to be a center and a space for people to enjoy language, pride in food, culture, and tonight we're celebrating the culture of Nora Jacquez and what she brings to us tonight by channeling the energy of her family, her grandparents, grandmothers, and we'll let her take the floor tonight. So welcome Nora and welcome all of you.
A few years ago, I wrote a book of poetry called Pieces of Light and Shadow. I wrote this for a granddaughter of the future. A granddaughter who perhaps in 200 years might be interested in how I thought or felt in my own time. And the reason is because I've always had that curiosity about my ancestral grandmother, Maria Rosa Yalpando, who lived in 5 different cultures in the 18th century. There is a highway marker dedicated to her between Taos and Santa Fe. There are articles written about her. There are historical documents in the New Mexico archives and the Missouri archives. My Tio Chano used to talk to me a lot about her, but I had no words. Until one day, she began to speak. Listen. "105 when I died? No, it's not possible. It's just not possible." The Missouri Republican and the St. Louis Beacon both said that when I died on July 25th, 1830, I was 107 years old. But in the 1750 New Mexico census, I was listed as a child of Pablo Villalpando, my father, and Teresa Vigil, my stepmother. A 27-year-old child? No. I was born around 1739. I don't know exactly when. I was married around the age of 19 to Juan Jose Jacquez. We had a little child, Julian, a little boy with a darling smile. And my father, Pablo, loved him so much, he took him everywhere. And now I know he saved his life. My husband and I were so young, we didn't know anything. We just knew that we had our whole future before us. Or so we thought. Our people, the people who came north to populate the lands claimed by Spain, were simple people. They were mostly devoted to farming. And Spain, then later Mexico, really forgot us, except when they needed money and they imposed new taxes on us. We had no schools. Our people were illiterate. I didn't know how to read or write. We had no protection from the Indians. We had a barter system. The barter system gave the rich Chihuahua merchants a huge advantage when they sent, once in a while, supply wagons north to us. In 1680, there was a very big Pueblo Indian rebellion. And 400 of our people were killed. The rest fled south to the El Paso area. And these people slowly migrated back north. It took them about 12 years. So in 1694, my grandfather was a soldier at the Presidio in Santa Fe, the capital of the territory. My father, Pablo, decided to go further north to the Taos area to devote himself to farming. We lived in a very large hacienda with very thick adobe walls, and we lived there with cousins, aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters, mother, father, a lot of people together. And this hacienda had a central courtyard, and it had 4 towers in each corner. These were always lookout towers, watchtowers, because of the Comanches. The Comanches were liable to descend on us at any moment and take our cattle, steal our horses, and often threaten our lives. Once in a while, our territorial governor made a treaty with these people, but one or the other would break the terms of the treaty, and then we were in danger again. We almost never lived in peace, but nothing prepared us for that fateful day in August when my life changed forever, never to be the same. My father was gone from the hacienda that day. He had taken little Julian with him to Taos. I believe he went to speak to the Taos Tribal Council. The Taos Pueblo Indians and the Comanches had had a serious skirmish, and the Pueblo Indians had killed and scalped 24 of the Comanche warriors. The Comanches were furious, and we knew we were in grave danger. It was about 10 o'clock in the morning on August 3rd, 1760, when the whole valley, filled with the thunderous roar of hundreds of horses' hooves and warrior cries racing toward the hacienda. They broke through the walls, they galloped at full speed into the courtyard and running over whoever was in their way. I ran and hid in a storeroom behind sacks of wheat that we had from the harvest. There was a lot of screaming and shrieking, and suddenly there was an eerie silence. I stepped out carefully from the storeroom into the light of the patio, and then I realized it was a Comanche trick. They had taken the people captive, and they had bound them and bound their mouths and thrown them against the hacienda walls. And we had a moment to see their eyes that were terrified. I suddenly was thrown to the ground by 2 Comanches and bound the same way, and my body thrown against the walls. And then the wait seemed eternal for the rest of our people to come out in hiding. The battle with the Comanches actually lasted most of the day. Only 7 of our men were in the hacienda that day, and they were all killed. including my husband, Juan Jose. The women took up rifles alongside the men, and 10 of our women were killed, including my stepmother, Teresa Vigil. The Comanches took 56 of us women and children captives. They left behind 100 of their own dead. We, the captives, left on foot, surrounded by Comanches on horseback. And whenever anyone dallied, they whipped them to hurry us along. Because of that invasion in the Taos Valley, the ranchos were left abandoned and in ruins. You know, I realize that I still have a great deal of sorrow in me when I think about my time among the Comanches. We were their slaves. Really, their sex slaves. They could do with us what they wanted. Once a year in Taos, there was a huge fair. The Comanches had the custom of taking their captives and either trading or selling them at this fair. One day, when I had been among them almost a year, I was put on the back of someone's horse and told we were going to the Taos Fair. There were 8 of us captives, including a 10-year-old little girl, Maria Elena. She was my first cousin. When we got to Taos, we went to the center of town because the Apaches were on the outskirts and those 2 tribes never got along. So at the Taos Fair, they separated them and the Comanches were in the center. I was standing near the auction block that day when suddenly I saw Maria Elena push toward the center. She was stark naked. A tall Comanche followed her, ordered her to bend over, and penetrated her then and there. The blood ran down her legs, and she was terrified, a terrified look I've never seen since. I know that our people took Indian women as captives as well. I can only hope that they were not treated as the Comanches treated us. They were brutal and without mercy. That day at the Taos Fair, I was traded to the Pawnees who had come from southern Nebraska. I didn't realize at the time that I was pregnant. 8 months later, my son, Antoine, was born. I had no idea who the father was. It could have been any one of a number of Comanches who did with me as they wanted and then traded me like one of their livestock. I tried not to think of those terrible times and just be thankful for this wonderful, healthy little boy I had. Antoine had a different name when we lived among the Indians, but to me, he'll always be my Antoine. And he reminded me of my son, Julian. And at this time, I didn't know what had happened to Julian. The life among the Pawnees was very different. we didn't have so much violence. And we women didn't have to move the camp all the time. We actually lived in a village, in domed houses made from adobe with cupolas alongside a river. I was taken to one of these houses by a man whom I always called simply Pony Man. Life became almost routine. I was expected to help with the preparation of meals, with the gathering of native plants, with the harvesting of vegetables like the squash and the corn. We tanned the hides of deer and buffalo and the pelts of beaver. We made clothes and mended the clothes from these hides. Sometimes at night, I was allowed to stay around the campfire and listen to their stories. I tried to understand and learn their language. I knew that the Pawnees thought that the owl and the woodpecker were sacred because they considered them messengers of the stars. The Pawnees believed that the stars were creators of everything. Humans, for the Pawnees, were star song. One night, I was fixing the meal over a campfire, pieces of buffalo meat and corn in the husk, roasting them on the coals, and suddenly the men of the village approached with a stranger, someone I had never seen before. I remember he had black curly hair and lovely green eyes, and he spoke to the people, the men, as if he knew them with a very familiar air. He was talking, and suddenly he saw me, and he looked at me very directly, and I was embarrassed, and I turned some more meat on the coals, and this felt very uneasy. But then the men went on talking, they ate their dinner, and after dinner I helped with the cleanup, and then I went back to my dome house with my Antoine. I wanted to prepare the beds for the night, and I sang on Antoine the song I always put him to sleep with. Duérmete, duérmete, angelito, duérmete, duerme, duérmete con los angelitos, porque eres un angelito. When Potty Man came back to the house, I asked him casually who the stranger was. I didn't want to appear particularly interested, but that look so direct that we looked at each other was in my memory, and I didn't know then that that man would play a new and a very important role in my life. His name is Jean Salé, Honey Man said. He comes from France, from across the ocean, and he's come with other Frenchmen to found a city, St. Louis, named after one of their saint kings. He is sent here as an emissary because they want to do business with us. They are interested in our buffalo and deer hides and our beaver pelts. And they've sent him with some cloth and ribbon for our women. Here's yours. I took this piece of ribbon and I wasn't quite sure what to do with it. Was it my waist? What? For your hair, Pawnee Man said. So, the next morning, I got up very early and I tied the ribbon in my hair. And I tiptoed out of the dome house because I wanted to start the fire for the breakfast tea. And I was at the fire and suddenly I felt a presence behind me. Bon, madame, vous apparaissez très élégante avec le liston à la chevaux. I didn't understand a word he said, but I knew it was the ribbon that attracted his attention. Afterwards, I learned his name was Jean Salé, but Jean Salé de la Joie, the joyful one, because this man was always happy. He was capable of lifting anyone's spirit, and with what I had been through, he captured my spirit. We only saw each other alone one more time then. I was in the woods gathering small sticks to start the fire, and I had a little pile here, and he came and knelt beside me and he started a pile, and then he took both piles and put them together, and then he took my hands and he just looked at me very seriously without saying a word. And then he was gone. We didn't see each other for another 2 years. One evening, about dusk, he came up to the campfire again. The men who were there greeted him, stood up to greet him, and he told us about a very difficult journey he had made from St. Louis by river in a dugout canoe. He'd come with 2 other Frenchmen who'd gone onto the mountains to look for beaver pells. He told the men he was so glad to be among friends, among his friends, the Pawnees, after the difficult trip and the skirmishes sometimes with the hostile Plains Indians. He suddenly, as he looked around at the people, he saw me, just looked at me for a brief moment. And then, 2 days later, 2 Pawnee women came to my dome house in the afternoon. And they said, "We are here to help you prepare for the journey." Journey? I said, "What journey? No one's talked to me about any journey. We don't know anything. We only know that the Frenchman has bought you, and you and your son are going to meet 2 other Frenchmen, and you're going to travel together. That's all we know." I was shocked. Interesting though, I never saw Pawnee Man again. When the village gathered to bid us farewell, he was nowhere in sight. I think he was embarrassed that he had traded me for a few coins. Later, I asked Jean how much I had cost him. And he threw his head back and he laughed and he said, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. What matters is we're now together. For the first time in such a long time, I felt loved and safe and happy. The trip to St. Louis was by dugout canoe, first along the North Platte, and then the Missouri, the great Missouri River. Antoine didn't let me out of his sight the whole journey. And we slept along the riverbanks at night. One of the men always stood guard. And one night, I woke screaming because I heard the sound of horses' hoofs, and I was screaming and screaming, and it was the memory of the Comanche raid. And I realized then that if something happened to Jean or to Antoine, I would die as well. I would not survive another invasion. Fortunately, that night, it was only a bad nightmare. When we got to St. Louis, it was magical. I had never seen the likes. Ships, boats, stores, fine stores with all kinds of the finely woven cloth and handkerchiefs and stockings and beads and buttons and so much variety of everything. And Jean was very good to us in those years. We actually had another son, a son, Lambert, who was born in 1768. And after his birth, Jean decided to formalize our relationship. And so on July 3rd, 1770, we were married in St. Louis. I signed the marriage contract with an X. I am referred to in the contract as Marie Rose Vidalpont, French. In the contract, Jean and I agreed that we would inherit from each other, and that Lambert or any other children we might have would inherit if something happened to the two of us. But Jean insisted that Antoine would not inherit. He is referred to in the marriage contract as the child of the savages. He did agree, however, to support Antoine until he was able to make his own living. I'm sad to tell you that we did have 3 other children, a boy and twin girls, but only one of the twins survived, my daughter, Hélène, who took care of me when I was left alone. You see, in 1792, when Jean was 53 years old, he told me he wanted to visit his country again. He wanted to see France. And you know, I understood, because I longed for the lands of New Mexico and my people. But the journey was so difficult and so impossible. It must have been for Jean as well, because I never heard from him again. What happened? I don't know. piracy on the high seas, a terrible plague, a violent storm. I don't know what happened. But I have refused to believe that he abandoned us. At that time, Antoine was 29, Lambert was 25, and Hélène was 21. We lived in the same house that Jean had built for us. My sons continued the family business, and it prospered, especially when St. Louis became a very important commercial center. I often thought of those good days with Jean. And I thought too about my son Julian, whom I had been forced to abandon so many years ago. He would be in his mid-40s now. And he was my Spanish child. Antoine was the child of the Indians, and Lambert and Hélène were my French children. 3 different fathers, and now I was alone. But in 1803, a middle-aged man came to my door. In St. Louis, I opened the door, and he gave me this beautiful smile. And I knew it was my Julian. How he found me. How had he made this journey? Who had raised him? What had his life been? We threw our arms around each other and cried and walked into the parlor and sat there, and he began to tell me that my father, Pablo, raised him. And Julian had married a woman who had given him 9 children and then died. Then he married again, and he had 2 more daughters. I couldn't believe I had so many grandchildren. I probably would never know. He stayed with us several weeks, Julian. We had so many stories to share. And you know, I wanted him to inherit, and I was told it wasn't possible because of the contract. And I was very sad in 1803 when he signed the document relinquishing his claims to inheritance on behalf of his half-sister, Hélène. When he left, I gave him some money, but not nearly enough for a son I hadn't seen in so many years. The house is gone now. It was on 4th Street between Elm and Myrtle, exactly where the base of the St. Louis Arch is today. The arch that commemorates the exploration of the West by the Americans, Lewis and Clark. But my life among the Spanish, the Comanches, the Pawnees, the French, and finally the Americans, my life is living proof that there were centuries of history in the West before Lewis and Clark. Thank you.